Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Collaborative Leadership for Collective Impact, brought to you by the NCSS, the Social Service Institute, and the Tamarack Institute. My name is Wee Peng of the NCSS, and this is the second webinar of this Collective Impact webinar series. In the first webinar, we discussed the details of starting a collective impact initiative, and I'm happy to see some of you returning to the second webinar. And one key takeaway for me from the first webinar was the importance of conversations. If we strip everything out from collective impact, conversation is the seed to build understanding and trust, and the project will then grow from that seed. And today, we're going to focus on the topic of leadership, specifically on the type of leadership that is required to make collective impact work. And therefore, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Liz Weaver from the Tamarack Institute. Liz Weaver is the co-CEO of Tamarack Institute, where she's leading the Tamarack Learning Center. Liz is well known for her thought leadership on collective impact and is the author of several popular and academic papers on the topic. She's also a co-catalyst partner with the Collective Impact Forum, and in 2018, led a collective impact capacity building strategy with the Ontario Trillium Foundation. Liz is passionate about the power and potential of communities getting to impact on complex issues. Prior to her current role at Tamarack, Liz led the Vibrant Communities of the Canada team and assisted on place-based collaborative tables, helping them to develop frameworks of change and supported and guided their projects from idea to impact. And Liz will start off with a presentation on collaborative leadership. And as she is going through her presentation, please participate by putting your comments or questions into the chat box or the Q&A panel. And therefore, without further ado, I'll just hand this over to Liz. Liz, over to you, please.
Thanks so much, Wee Peng. And hello, everybody. Welcome to this second webinar in this series. As Wee Peng mentioned, I'm going to be talking about collaborative leadership. And there are four things that I want to cover in my presentation today. One is about how collaborative leadership connects into collective impact and making the bridge between those two concepts. I also want to talk about how collaborative leadership is unique and what we need to be thinking about when we think about collaborative leadership. I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of board members in helping advance collective impact efforts and really think about how different skills and resources can be deployed to make your collective impact efforts even more successful. But we're going to start off with diving a little bit into the concept of collaborative leadership. At Tamarack, we've been influenced by many folks, and the first person that really influenced my thinking around collaborative leadership is this gentleman out of the United States. His name's David Chrysler, and he wrote this book called The Collaborative Leadership Field Book. And what he kind of identified in the Collaborative Leadership Field Book is this premise, right? And the premise goes that if you bring the appropriate people together in constructive ways with good information, they will create authentic visions and strategies for addressing the shared concerns. Now he wrote the collaborative premise before collective impact was written, but it's really interesting because lots of the elements of collective impact appear in this collaborative premise. What I like about it is that you don't have to bring everybody together, but it's the appropriate people. David and his partner, Kit Larson, went on to say, you know, there are some shared agreements around collaborative leadership that you have to build into your practice. And, you know, these again are very helpful as we think about collaborating with others and the type of leadership that we bring to this work. One is that there has to be a reason why we're coming together, that we have to agree that this is a concern that really needs, you know, us and other people to sit around the table. And this is particularly not only in collaboration, but also true in collective impact. We also have to think about how we're going to work together. in collective impact, they talk about shared measurement. David Crislip talks about it as a shared understanding of the information, so that, you know, if we're tackling a big issue like poverty or homelessness or supporting aging seniors, we've all got to, we might come at it from different lenses, but we've got to kind of have this shared understanding of what does this like from my organizational context, what does it look like from government's perspective, what might it look like from a family's perspective? So what's that shared understanding? Define the problem together and then agree on solutions and action steps. So David Crislip was pretty instrumental in our thinking at Tamarack. A couple of years ago, I started to kind of take his thoughts and begin to kind of think about them in the context of leadership, and particularly collaborative leadership. And this table that you see on this slide is really my attempt to kind of think about, okay, so what types of leadership forms and strategies are out there? And then what would we want to do, or how could we position them in a way that kind of understands that there are lots of different ways that we lean into leadership. So some of us might look at collaborative leadership, others at network leadership. Some of us work in the area of grassroots leadership and catalytic leadership. And so, you know, simple leadership forms are things like community, grassroots, and systems and transformational leadership is there in terms of that farther quadrant, what we're hoping to get to when we're working in the area of collective impact. On the next slide, I went a little bit deeper in terms of really thinking about impactful collaborative leadership. And there were 5 principles that informed my thinking and my research. And this comes from multiple sources as I started to go deeper into thinking about collaborative leadership. And so one is, you know, collaborative leadership is about bringing multiple voices to the table. And so how do we, as leaders that are really working at the edge of community change, how do we really understand and listen to citizens in our community, those that are the recipients of our programs and services, and really build our collaborative efforts around the voice of individuals with lived and living experience? The other principle is really that we've got to learn to be better at working across boundaries, recognizing that, you know, there's real advantages that we have in our communities, and we see this a lot with collective impact efforts. There's real advantages when we bring, you know, government leaders to the table, and we'll hear from Melissa later today about some of that when we, you know, bring NGO leaders or community-based leaders to the table, when we bring in citizens and when we bring in the business community, that we really need to work adaptively, because even as we begin to intervene in the community starts responding. And so that's about adaptive change. And then, you know, we have to be courageous in this work and really think about systems. And I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. The thing that has been really interesting for us at Tamarack most recently is considering leadership within the disruptive times that we're going through, and particularly collaborative leadership. And we've been doing some work with our colleague, Mark Kabaj, and he's, you know, talking about, you know, we had this sense of somewhat stability pre-pandemic, and then the pandemic came along, and there's 3 possible futures. And, you know, this is where our adaptive leadership skill set really comes to play, right? And so one future is that we're going to return to the old equilibrium, and that may or may not work for some people. Another future is that, you know, we're going to bounce around a little bit, and maybe we'll find a new equilibrium. And then the third future is that there might be, you know, second waves of COVID and other things that happen in our communities as governments and philanthropies and community organizations try to respond to the pandemic, which means that there will be kind of this continual shift of disequilibrium. What this means for collaborative leadership is that we need each other even more. It really calls to us to say that, you know, collaborative leadership is critically important in times of shifting sands and adaptive change. So that kind of sets the context for collaborative leadership. You know what's interesting to me? I just read this article that appeared in the Harvard Business Review, and this is the lens that the business community is thinking about collaborative leadership, and and really collaborative leadership within disruptive times. And it's not so different than I would propose that we need to be thinking about it from a government and voluntary sector, NGO sector perspective. And so in this article, they talked about 6 things to kind of keep in mind. One is that leaders play a pivotal role in protecting the core or the essence of their organizations or their businesses, that they need to look to their internal resources, or in some cases to external resources, those cross-functional teams, to really help them, adjust to these challenges and trends that are happening, that there are new opportunities. And I would say to you, even as you think about the context within Singapore, and we'll hear from our speakers later, that there are new opportunities emerging. And so we kind of have to keep our eyes out for those new opportunities, that we really think we need to kind of think about our context as responsive and agile, and that comes right from the top of the organization, but should be something that flows entirely through your organization and through your collaborative as well. And then to really think about, collectively, where can we pivot? And so that, I think, for me, kind of sets the broad context about collaborative leadership. If we think about it in the context of collective impact, we know that in our last presentation, we talked about the kind of form of collective impact, recognizing that there are 3 preconditions to collective impact: influential champions, urgency of the issue, and adequate resources. Collaborative leadership is really connected both to influential champions. So you want to think about, in a collective impact context, who are those champions in the community that you can draw to the issue that you want to work on collectively, who have a sphere of influence, who not only want to sit at the table, but in sitting at the table, they're also going to be transforming their own organization and aligning their organization's work. And so if you think about an educational initiative, for example, you might have principals of schools at the table, and teachers and parents and community-based organizations, and you might have the Ministry of Education. All of them are important partners around the table, but you also want to transform how they're thinking about the issue and how their organization might be engaged with the issue, and how the organization might begin to work differently. Under the design of collective impact, as we know, there are 5 core functions to collective impact. Those are a common agenda, shared measurement, mutually reinforcing activities, continuous communications, and backbone. And, if you think about the concepts embedded in this idea of collaborative leadership, common agenda is really that all the leaders around the table are engaged in co-designing or co-creating the common agenda, and that you bring diverse voices to the table. In mutually reinforcing activities, collaborative leadership is really about organizations and partners around the table thinking, hey, I'm involved in this educational initiative. Here's something that we're already doing that can align with this work. And so really purposely connecting their organization, their practices in alignment with the work. And then finally, backbone support. So certain organizations around the table might play a pretty pivotal role in terms of governance, leadership, and backbone support. And so how can we do that from a collaborative perspective, saying that the backbone is really in service of the collaborative, not in service of, particular organizations around the table. It's really about common agenda and the shared and collective work moving forward. So you can see the weaving of the concepts of collaborative leadership, and connecting them to these ideas of collective impact. One thing that we know about collective impact is that it is about working differently and thinking about that. And so, when we think about collective impact, we often neglect the idea of how the board of directors of our organizations can be brought into the collective work. And I think, I know that when Wei-Peng and those of us at Tamarack, my colleague Paul Bourne and myself at Tamarack, were talking about this session, we said, this is a thing that, here's part of our collective or our collaborative resources we often neglect. And so on this slide, you can see how we think a board of directors could play a really pivotal role in helping to advance the collective impact effort. So you want to think about, in your organization, the notion of mission alignment and how the organization, as I said, is helping to advance the collective issue. Are we able to share data, access data, and what are we doing in the programs and services that our organization is already delivering that connects to population level impact? And et cetera. So this table is really helpful in trying to define some of those roles that the board of directors can steward on behalf of the organizations that are sitting around the collective impact table. So collective impact is about collaborative leadership, but it's also about working differently. And it's about, utilizing the concepts of collaborative leadership in a way that we think and act differently around these collective impact tables. And there's kind of 4 approaches to thinking about acting and working differently. One is to consider who's involved. So who's around the table and how are we truly getting to the root cause of the collective impact issue that we're trying to transform. It's about thinking how we're going to work together. It's considering how progress happens and also thinking about leadership. And so I'm going to go through these 4 points relatively quickly. So first, who's involved? And so the folks who wrote the papers, the background papers about collective impact, John Kenya and Mark Kramer, talk about this notion of creating a common agenda, but it's also about a common intent and also being in this place of emergence. And to get to a common intent, it's really about the collaborative leaders around the table saying, in lots of conversations around the table, what are we seeing? What's happening in Singapore around this issue that we want to move forward? So from my perspective, I might see this, but from Wei-Peng's perspective, he might see this. From Paul Bourne's perspective, he might see this. From Melissa's perspective, she might see something else, all based on the fact that we're in different places in our organizations and in the communities. And so the coming together, the sharing collaboratively of what we're seeing actually enriches our understanding of the problem and also our connection to the issue that we're trying to resolve, gives us that kind of higher level of seeing and then being able to learn together and also then to be able to collectively do together. So how we work together around these collaborative tables is really important. The next thing is really to begin to think about how we're kind of moving from this notion of only working at programmatic change. And so Karen Pittman, who's the co-founder and president and CEO of the Forum for Youth Investment, had a really wise quote that she shared at one of the convenings that we had at Tamarack. And she says, that programmatic interventions help people beat the odds, but systemic interventions help change the odds. And so what I take away from this quote from Karen is that we need both, right? So in our collective impact efforts or in our collaborative efforts, we need to have each of the people around the collaborative table or the collective impact table play their position and help with those programmatic interventions, or as collective impact frames it, those mutually reinforcing activities. But we also need to do this collective seeing, this collective learning, and this collective doing to look at what are some of those systemic challenges that are holding these problems in place. The folks at FSG go one step further and they developed a tool called the Water of Systems Change. And so what they have identified are 6 things that hold really complex problems in place. They frame them as 6 conditions. And so these 6 conditions are things like policy flows or policy changes or policy practices, practices that happen in our organization and resource flows, relationships and connections, power dynamics, and mental models. And the way that they come at systems changes, they ask this question: what's holding your problem in place? And so if you think about your problem as being, caring for frail and elderly seniors, in a neighborhood, which is the example that we heard of in our last webinar, is it a resource flow that's holding that problem in place? Do we have too many organizations working in silos? And if we joined up those organizations in a collective impact way, would that change the way services and programs are supporting, elderly and their families in those communities? Is it a practice flow? Are there power dynamics that we have to navigate? Or is it our mental model that holds that problem in place? And so the tool that they have developed at FSG is really helpful for kind of breaking down each of these 6 conditions and really kind of considering them in the context of collective impact. This is about working differently, which they're suggesting, and something that we need to do when we're sitting around collective impact tables or collaborative tables, is to really ask ourselves some more courageous questions about what am I doing as an organization to help support and advance this collective impact effort. But equally an important question is, what am I doing that's holding one of these tensions, one of these conditions, in a way that it's creating problems or creating dilemmas that we need to be navigating forward. And then the final thing, from a leadership perspective, which is, collective leadership or collaborative leadership, it actually, again, calls us to be a little bit different, right? It calls us to bring, in many cases, our positional leadership to bear, because we are those influential champions, that first kind of precondition of collective impact. But positional leadership is not enough in collective impact work or in collaborative leadership work. It's also about sharing leadership and recognizing that sometimes we are not the ones to be at the front, that it might be the citizen with lived experience who's talking about their experience that really helps inform the process, or it might be government who's leading out on something because they're making a significant investment, or it might be a business leader in a community or an NGO leader. So shared and adaptive leadership is really about, recognizing in our collective and collaborative leadership way that there are times when we can have that really great opportunity of harvesting all the leadership that we have around our collective impact and collaborative tables. Now, the final section that I'm going to present quickly is just kind of thinking about governance, collective impact governance, from the lens of collaborative leadership. And so often what we see in this kind of collaborative governance is at the center this notion of community ownership. What we've seen, at Tamarack and in the work that we do with lots of organizations in other countries is, if you're working collectively and the community believes that this is an important issue that is really going to help them transform themselves, and they're really wanting to be part of it, having community ownership at the center really helps all the partners around the collective impact table and around the collaborative leadership table to advance the work. And these are just some roles that you can see in a typical kind of collective impact governance structure. The next 2 slides kind of go into these roles in a little bit more detail. And we've done some thinking about this, and some of them might apply to some of your collective impact work in Singapore. Some of them might be slightly different. I think what's interesting and what's really helpful is to consider, how are we governing our collective impact work? What are the things that are important to us? And how might we build a frame around it? In addition to these kind of core governance roles, we also see that collective impact opportunities have a way of really inviting in the collective wisdom of the community. And so some people might be sitting around the leadership table. Some people might be bringing in their board members to kind of connect into this work. There's a whole range of opportunities in collaborative and collective impact work. And so here's kind of some of our brainstorming that we've done. Some of these roles don't necessarily have to be embedded in the leadership table. You can reach into the community of supporters that you have in this work and say, hey, can you help us with marketing and media? Or do you have some data that might be helpful? So go to your government partners and say, hey, is there some data that would help inform? And so really to kind of consider that there is a number of different kinds of roles. And, you know, my colleague and I wrote a paper, Collective Impact 3.0, and we talked about, you know, creating these movements for change. And these additional roles in collective impact really help us kind of push out this notion of these movements for change. The next slide begins to kind of take us into thinking about what are some of those essential tools that you need when you're thinking about bringing lots of people to work around collective and collaborative tables. And so these are some of the tools that we consider important, but there are two things I wanted to kind of think about in my final slide with you, my final two slides with you. And one is, you know, I'm really kind of thinking about membership and thinking about characteristics beyond, you know, structure. And these characteristics, these considerations are, you know, ones that if you're in the early stages of forming your collective impact work, or you're thinking about who I want to draw into this work, or you might go through a transition and you're wanting to bring in some new people because some individuals have left your leadership table, you might want to think about, you know, some of these considerations and think about, okay, so what kinds of conversations do I need to have around my table that starts to help enrich our considerations, so that we're really making sure we have the right mix of influential champions who are interested in working differently in our communities around these kinds of challenges that we're facing. Some of the challenges of this work, because it's not all roses, there are challenges in collective impact work and working with, you know, collaborative leaders, because those are folks that are really driven to community results and really engaged in community. And so you really want to consider things like, how are we dealing with power dynamics around our table? What's the tension that we feel between having the right process in place so that we're all working well together and we're trying to get at systems change and population level change, and what's the right products that we have in place. And that's always a tension in collective impact work and in collaborative work. Sometimes there's too many opportunities or not enough opportunities. And sometimes the pace of change is so fast that you're having trouble around your collaborative tables keeping up with the pace of change. And so in a really quick kind of 20 minutes, I've taken you through some core concepts around collaborative leadership and how we've been influenced at Tamarack around collaborative leadership. Shared with you, you know, how collaborative leadership is really woven into the collective impact framework and into the collective impact design. So if we could turn to the next slide really quickly, Rite, that would be great. And then really kind of thought about, you know, what do we need? What do we need to make this be effective for us? And I look forward to hearing the next two presentations. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Wee Peng, so that you can introduce our next speakers. And I also look forward to your questions. So please pop them into the chat box.
Thank you, Liz. Certainly, there's a lot of information in your presentation, a lot of content that can be drilled down further, and this is meant to be an overview, and certainly this is a start for those who are interested to start a collective impact initiative. We have started online community of learning in Gather Here. There's a Gather Here. At the end of this webinar, we will be sending something to you to invite you to be part of Gather Here, and certainly using that platform to share more information about collective impact and as well as resources. So one takeaway that I can come out from hearing from Liz is this whole idea of population level change versus programmatic level change. And it's so important for leaders to have a mindset of what is the population level change that we want to impact on, and what are the barriers preventing us from achieving that. And then from asking those questions, perhaps we can then reach out to partners and collaborators that can help us to achieve that kind of change beyond the programs that we have been running on a day-to-day basis. So that was an important key takeaway for me, listening from Lise. So the next speaker is Melissa, and Melissa is with the MCCY, and a very privileged to have her today. And she has been with the engagement unit of the Resilience and Engagement Division in MCCY since September 2016. And her work involves developing and promoting the adoption of central engagement resources for whole of government, as we develop new capabilities for deeper and more collaborative ways of working with stakeholders and citizens. And we are very happy to have Melissa with us today to share about the SG Together movement and why this movement is so relevant to all of us. So, but unfortunately, Melissa wouldn't be able to stay beyond 10 a.m. But if you have questions, comment, do post them in the chat box or Q&A panel, and we will try to reply them. Or if not, subsequently, we can follow up with emails from Melissa directly. Okay, so without further ado, I'll let Melissa take over the mic. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Wee Peng, and thank you, Liz, for that overview. I think it really puts into a useful frame some of the things that I will be sharing today. And looking down the list of attendees, I have to confess that I'm in the space with many experts and very experienced professionals when it comes to engagement and partnerships. So I think my objective for today is really just to, I suppose, offer the public sector's perspective and share a bit about how our thinking around partnerships, working with communities has evolved, and also point towards the directions that we'll be moving into in the years ahead, and hopefully at the end of this part, stimulate some ideas from you here and from your organizations. As Wee Peng said, I'm afraid, I'm so sorry that I have to leave at 10, but my colleagues Wendy and Sean are here attending the session, so feel free to post your questions. Either they will take it during this session, or we will come back to you after. So thank you. All right, so I think what is important to state up front is that, Wee Peng mentioned I'm here to share about Singapore Together. And I think those of us who are familiar in Singapore, we are very comfortable with taglines. There's just a lot going around, right? And Singapore Together, is it something new? The answer is no. I think when we look back at how Singapore as a nation has been solving problems that face our communities, it has always been in collaboration in some form or other, with or without a framework. And that's the first point that I wanted to make today, that while the nature of these collaborations have been evolving throughout history, but the idea is that it's almost part of the Singaporean DNA to convert our diversity into a form of strength to overcome the challenges of this, very unexpected nation. So what's new and what's changed? What's the new impetus for us today? I think even before the pandemic struck, within the public service, we recognize that there are some key drivers that mean that we have to change the way we operate quite fundamentally. And these that I'll just bring out two here, which I think you agree with. One is that the issues that we're facing as a society, as a country, have become more complex, and that the government alone does not have the monopoly of wisdom, and much less the answers and solutions to our challenges. And secondly, I think also it will be a missed opportunity if we did not sort of work more closely with very resourceful partners that we have outside of the public sector, which means that also we will need a different way of partnering, a different way of bringing people together and having a structured way of sort of developing the ideas into tangible and realistic solutions. So, and what is this all for at the end of the day, right? I think it's not just about the very functional need to solve problems. If I could also suggest this idea that when communities work together on a shared challenge that impacts all of us, in the long run, it really helps to develop that sense of ownership for the place that we call home, to also develop our ethic of citizenship, which also contributes to our sense of nationhood identity. And at the end of the day, more trusting, more caring relationships among communities, and also between government and the citizenry. I mean, of course, after all, they say that you defend what you love, and I think the process of love is basically that, is a process, and that it's only through participation and having more people take part in this entire sort of community building process that we can achieve those national level aspirations of citizenship, ownership, trust, and care. Yeah, so and I think that this is something that our political leadership also holds very closely to their heart. So here's a short summary of our DPM's quote. And he said this when he was talking about the solidarity budget in April, right in the at the cusp of the circuit breaker. But really, he launched this Singapore Together movement a year before, last year actually. And the basic idea about Singapore Together as a movement is about government sort of moving from only just working for citizens, but also with citizens, so that we can, and now with the pandemic and all that we have gone through over the last few months, it's really about how we work together to emerge stronger as a society. And what does this mean really? A couple of things I mentioned earlier before as well. One is about the government working closely with our partners, citizens, stakeholders, to foster consensus amidst all the myriad challenges that we'll face. And more importantly, to sort of come together to work on not just programmatic interventions, as was mentioned earlier, but we also want to move upstream to see how we can bring in partners into the policy-making process, so that the system level changes can change the odds, to use the words that Liz was sharing with us earlier. And not just about government working with partners, but also within communities, which is why I was quite excited to be able to join in this collective impact webinar. It's about how do we create platforms and opportunities to support and facilitate more intra-community collaborations. And finally, of course, as the pandemic has shown us, it's really about how do we stay united when things are hard, and helping each other to weather the storms. And I think, to use the words of one of our founding fathers, Rajaratnam, he talked about the idea of a democracy of deeds. And I think that basically sums up how we view this notion of partnership, that it's conversation, certainly, but it's also about collective action. And for SG Together, it's really about opening up space for as many people to be part of this process as possible. So I mentioned earlier that I wanted to share some of our thinking around the role of government with this partnership way of working. I could think of 4. I'm sure that the group here will have other suggestions as well. So I'll just put this on the table. The government, in our minds, we play several roles depending on the context and depending on the issue. Firstly, as a convener, I suppose because of the sort of different networks that we come into contact with and that we work together with, sometimes we can be a neutral party to bring different stakeholders to the table to work together on a common issue. Sometimes we could be participants in a conversation and help to catalyze some of the ideas and bring them to fruition to help with the prototyping process, either through funding, seed funding, or through connecting our community partners up with one another. Coordination is also, I think, a role that, and aggregation is a role that I think the public sector can play. We saw this over the last few months during the circuit breaker period, where where there was a groundswell of community offering help, offering support, offering aid, but they were coming to us, to the agency, saying, where can I channel my help to? And that was where we could bring some of the agencies together to try and identify where the most urgent and critical needs are, and sort of channel the help there. And last but not least, the idea of communication and amplification. And that is really to help sort of raise the overall public awareness on the importance of partnership, on the good work that is happening with the various collaborations in the communities, so as to inspire more people to come into the fold, to join us, and also to demonstrate, right, that this is what it means to be active and contributing to our community. And for that, talking about all our roles and what we rely on our partners then for many things, for your experience, expertise, networks, and more importantly, that nimbleness to be able to very quickly and sensitively identify issues in your communities and work with various partners to address the challenges effectively. In the next few slides, I'm just going to, because I think a lot of the stuff that I've shared earlier is quite conceptual. And so in the next few slides, I just wanted to share 3 or 4 examples of what these partnerships could look like. And you'll see that they're all quite different, both in terms of where the partnerships are situated in the policy or program process, as well as the level of maturity of the relationships within that partnership. But I'm just going to put it out there and just sort of give you a sense of what we mean when we say working together. The first example is from the environment sector. The Friends of Ubin Network. I think those of us who have lived here for some time will be familiar with Ubin, and many of us care very much about preserving the biodiversity that's there, as well as the way of life of the villagers who still live there. And I think and this is an effort by our colleagues at MND. So although I'm from MCCY, I have also taken the liberty to ask my colleagues from different parts of the public sector if I can share some of their examples with you today, just to demonstrate what that partnership looks like. And what NParks specifically did was, rather than, if you think about the conventional model of working for citizens, I suppose that the instinct would have been to set up a team within NParks in a public agency and to develop a suite of programs and then sort of descend on the island and implement those programs to the community. But because so many of us are so passionate about Ubin, that was not a sustainable or a wise way forward, in that it wouldn't optimize the outcomes. So what NParks did was they brought together the different stakeholders. These make up villagers themselves, academics, people who were very passionate about Ubin, about the environment, some of the heritage groups and nature groups as well. And mind you, what we know is that not all of them were completely on the same page with one another when this whole thing first started in 2014. But never mind. I think, as Wee Peng mentioned, let's start with conversation. And all these various partners were brought together. There was a period of sort of trying to find that common mission and common agenda. And that was in 2014. It took a while. And since then, they've reached a stage where this network of partners, they meet up regularly. The agenda for these meetings are often led by the different stakeholder groups. So they propose the topics for discussion. And they use the sessions to sort of plan what are the priority areas that they would like to work on for Ubin. And then they implement, right? And it's not NParks alone doing it, but the volunteer networks that have been formed around this Friends of Ubin network. They are the members of the community, so they are the ones of executing, planning and executing the programs on the island. And NParks' role the government's role is really sort of to bring the parties together and to sort of support some of these programming there. What I think is a nice sort of epilogue, not epilogue because the process is still going, but what happened next was that this model was successful to the extent that NParks sort of brought out this model to say that, okay, we've seen how it could work for Ubin. Now let's see how it can work for our, was it 50 parks all across the island on nature reserves. And let's see how we can also build similar community networks to take care of and to help develop the parks all across Singapore. And so I think this is a really exciting development. Of course, I'm sure the networks for each of the parks will look quite different, but I think the fundamental idea that this is a community-owned and community-driven is something that they would be sure to hold for each of the parks networks. So that's one. I could move on. The next one is an MSF example, and they work with vulnerable groups. And so I'm sure that this will be close to many of your hearts. Many of you work very closely with MSF. And I just wanted to highlight this recent effort by MSF, particularly in the space of people with disabilities. They held, so again, I suppose the typical way of developing a master plan, as it sounds, might be, you know, we're often accused of sitting in our ivory tower and churning out papers. I think that's a bit of a caricature now. And what MSF did instead when coming up with this master plan, enabling master plan, was to convene stakeholders and to spend the time. So these were 7 half-day sessions involving many different PWD groups, their caregivers, as well as the people who work with them on service delivery, and bring them together to really listen and to share with one another on some of their needs and challenges that they've observed and how they envision the future. And what I thought was interesting to highlight about this was a lot of care and thought was put into the engagement process. So it's not a typical focus group discussion, but there was very intentional design to make sure that regardless of their disabilities, that our PWD friends were able to participate fully in each of the engagement sessions. And to help us build up the capability for this, actually from these engagement sessions, we've also developed toolkits that other colleagues who may have to engage PWDs in their forthcoming engagements to use, so that they can also make their engagement sessions as inclusive as possible. Right, so that's on the engagement process front. But substantially, I think the input from these engagement sessions will be fed into the recommendation report for the MSF will be putting up, that is that of the Independent Living and Employment Work Group. So this is co-chaired by Minister of Social and Family Affairs, as well as a couple of community leaders and MPs. Yeah, and I think the other thing to highlight as well is that these engagements are not a one-off, and that closing the loop is also very important. And MSF will be bringing the participants together again to share what has come out of all the things that they have said during the earlier sessions. So I think closing the loop also is another important aspect of collaboration, especially when there are multiple stakeholders involved. Another MSF example, and I don't think I will sort of go through this in deep detail, but I just wanted to highlight, this is the Peers Network on supporting the rough sleeper community in Singapore. And you will have the slides after this, but I just wanted to highlight that this one was interesting because it was very much community-led from the beginning, even before MSF put a focus on the issue. And when they did, there was quite a fair bit of relationship building that had to be done so that MSF could gain the trust of the community workers that are in contact with the rough sleepers. And I think where government can make a difference here is that, you know, from the program level intervention, now there is an opportunity to look at a review of the policies and some of the legislation and protocols to address the issues faced by homeless persons and rough sleepers in Singapore. And I think that this is one example from MSF, but we're hoping that there could be more of such examples, more of such issues that we can work on together at the policy level going forward. This is an MCCY example and my last one, and that's the SG Cares movement. And SG Cares, again, it's a label, but really what it does is pulls together and describes the efforts of multiple community-based partners to build a more caring and inclusive home. And a couple of things to highlight here are two sort of concepts. One is the idea of an SG Cares community network, which is we are trying to sort of convene in every town. So there are 24 of them. And the idea is, regardless of whether you are a public sector organization, or if you're an educational institution, if you're a business, or if you're a social sector organization or religious organization, you are based in that community, you're based in that town. And are there ways that we can pull these partners closer together, share more information among them, identify some of the priority needs that are unique to that town, and work on it together? So I think that's the idea of, I think a lot of the principles that Liz shared earlier on how to govern a collaborative partnership would be quite applicable to something like the SG Cares network. So within the SG Cares community network is the notion of a volunteer center. I'm not sure how many of you here are familiar with the idea, but a volunteer center could be an SSA. It could be also a public sector agency. It could be a community-based organizations. But one of their key roles is really to sort of make the connections between the people who can help and the people who need help at the community level. So really at the town level, and in a way sort of operate above your social sector, the VC's social sector mandate, to look at the needs of the community and the town as a whole, and then do the right sort of coordination and channeling, which I think is something that is relatively new. It started in 2017, and the MCCY team is progressively going to the different estates to try and work with the right partners to support them and resource them as volunteer centers so that they can do this important work. And I think the distinction to make, the important point to raise here is that, again, I think it would have been the easier path to just set up new structures and new organizations to do this, to achieve this objective. But I think the intuition of having asset-based community development is quite key here. And that rather than set up new structures, why not work with the right partners that are in those towns with the right set of relationships, the right kind of ambition and aspiration, and then resource them. I think that's something that's pretty unique about the volunteer center kind of model. And one of the recent initiatives that they've started as a result of emerging from the circuit breaker is to really see how we can rally the community to reach out to 50,000 rental households across Singapore. And so this helps you see the potential power of the community network if we could really bring together the various parties from government and community and corporates. If there's more information that you like about the SG Cares community network, you can approach us after the webinar. Yeah. Next couple of slides is really just because my team was very much involved in helping to coordinate community response for when the COVID crisis first broke out, and it was a really tough time for all of us, I have to confess, and for all of you, I'm sure. But what really kept us going was how much community support it was exploding. Like every day people were coming to us, say, how can I help? I want to do something. And I think I just wanted to put it out here that the resources are there. The resources are ready to step up to the plate. And which is why I feel that this conversation that we're having about collaborative partnership and leadership is so critical, because this is really something very invaluable. Our citizens coming up to say, tell me what I can do. If there's any silver lining to the pandemic, it is this. It is people finding new purpose or new priorities in their lives and saying, this is what I want to do for my fellow Singaporeans. And so it's something that we should really try to work with going forward. Yeah, it's not just individual citizens, but also companies, tech companies, design companies. They are also part of the whole idea of partnership. And this is just examples of a couple of design challenges that have taken place over the last few months. Last couple of slides, thank you for your patience. I just wanted to highlight a couple of platforms that you have already heard of, or you may be hearing more of, hopefully after today. In that there will be quite a number, and by quite a number, it's quite a lot of emerging stronger conversations that will be taking place, organized by all the various agencies and their partners. And this sort of is kind of the next phase of the Singapore Together movement, where we want to create platforms together with our partners to give a chance for us as a Singaporean community to reflect, to just take some pause and to reflect on what we've just experienced, to share that with one another, and then after that to sort of think about what we hope a stronger society could be. And the output from that, we would like to be able to identify some of the important issues and themes, not just important to government, but also important to communities that we can then pick up and form action networks around that we can work on together. On the economic side, there is already the Singapore Together, the Emerging Stronger Task Force and Alliances for Action. And on the social side, the equivalent are the Singapore Together action networks. And you will see them progressively forming over the next few months, over the next year. We want this to become a way of working, part and parcel of how we govern. And we really look forward to our partners sort of coming to us with some of their concerns, their ideas, and their priorities as well. So the website is there. Please check it out. You can take part as an individual citizen or as a leader in your organization. I think we welcome that. And I just wanted to end with this. And this was said by our Senior Minister Tharman, that really what is all this about, right? What are all these endeavors for? It's really to build a stronger sense of solidarity, and a stronger sense of ourselves as a country, as a nation. And the greatest confidence that we can get in our future, given all the uncertainties that are ahead of us, is really our social compact, meaning the relationships we have with one another as individuals, as communities, and the relationship that we have with the government. And it's a journey, and as always, the Singapore brand is about being forward-looking, spirited, and more cohesive. And I just wanted to end with that. I really thank you for being very patient with the presentation. Any questions, please put them in the chat. If we don't get to them today, we will come back to you after the webinar. Thanks very much. Thank you very much for the time, Lim Ping.
Thanks, Melissa, for that very informative sharing. And really, the reason why we have Melissa to share with us is because we want to let you know that the ground is fertile right now. The time is right. If you want to do something, you want to change something at a population level, in your local community, there are these dots that's waiting for people to connect. So do ask your questions to Melissa's team, and then they will be able to come back and respond to it. If you are interested to talk to someone in NCSS about collective impact ideas, do approach me and my team as well. We will be sharing our email contact with you after the webinar. All right. The next speaker that we have today is Kar Yee. Ms. Lim Kar Yee is the Senior Director at the People's Association, looking after the 5 community development councils. Her work includes bridging communities, building capabilities and social networks, and strengthening local social infrastructure. All right, to really foster community bonding, the social compact that Melissa mentioned about. And Kar Yee helps partners to connect to communities to meet emerging and felt needs. And she and her team have been a backbone agency for a collective impact initiative called the Integrated Care Program. And I've known Kar Yee personally and felt her passion as a collaborative leader, which is why I've invited her today to share her passion as well as a reflection with all of you in her collective impact journey. So without further ado, let me just introduce Kar Yee to this presentation.
Thank you, Wee Peng. It was very interesting to hear the presentation by Liz and also Melissa, very enriching as well. Today, I think I'm the last speaker, and I think many of you have heard the presentations already. So my suggestion is I would like to invite everybody to just close their eyes, because I only have 2 slides. I do not have that many slides. I only have 2 slides. So when the time comes for the slides to be flashed, I will ask you to open your eyes. So take a break, have a rest, just listen to what I have to share with you. Hopefully it will help you to better understand what we're trying to do. Today with me also, I have my ICP partners. So I want to say hello to the ICP partners as well. Mei Ling, Jenny, Hui Kim, and the rest. So why don't I kickstart the process? So usually when people, when we make a presentation on integrated care program, people will ask, in a group, everyone is a leader, yet no one is the leader. So the question people ask usually is, so who leads who? This is a question that everybody asks because they are wondering, if there is no leader leading the group, who is leading the group? So this phrase actually sums up what collaborative leadership is all about. And I personally think that it is rather intuitive, and everyone, if you're interested, can do it. To use an old-fashioned example, practicing collaborative leadership is like being in a strong marriage. Imagine you and your spouse having equal partnership in the relationship. Then think about the ingredients of a strong marriage. If you apply these ingredients into your collaboration, especially for collaboration with complex problems, then you will probably be able to be on the road to a lasting and strong collaboration involving many different partners. We think you're not closing your eyes. You can close your eyes, yeah. So just listen. In particular, it is quite useful, I think, if you plan to work with the millennials, which will make up about 75% of global workforce by 2025. And I think these are the group of young people that we want to engage in a different way, especially if you want to collaborate with them, especially when you want to engender them, empower them, and also encourage them to take ownership. So I think it calls for a different type of thinking of how we want to work with people in a collaboration. And I think it all has to do with leadership. Let me just share a bit more about ICP, which Wee Peng has alluded to earlier on. 7 years ago, a couple of partners, a primary school principal and I were called to the Northeast CDC office. By then, the education minister, he's now the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Heng Swee Keat. He asked an interesting question. It's a very simple question. Could we not work together to help the vulnerable student in Eastview Primary School? So now, it may be a simple question, but if you unpack the question, there is a lot to it. No doubt, this is not a unique question because many of you who are here today are working with youth or children and are also helping them. But the ICP partners have been at it for 7 years. And the ICP is also growing in terms of the number of partners, in terms of the types of help we give, in terms of the numbers of schools, and in terms of the number of students we are working with. So what is ICP? Really, it is a child-centric wraparound program that helps vulnerable primary school kids until they graduate and progress to secondary schools. Over the years, the ICPs have had many ups and downs. It is not plain sailing for us because our partners work very hard to make sure that the kids are not left behind. Let me share with you 5 such examples or hurdles that we have been through with the partners. So just maybe 18 to 20 months into the program, we almost gave up because we ran out of money. We knocked on many doors together because we just did not want to give up on the kids. Finally, we managed to get the money to continue on. The second example is really that we realized that there are more needs than we could cope with for the limited number of partners that we have. And that's where the CDCs as aggregator of resources come in. So later on, you'll see that when I share with you the ICP model for collective impact, we have included a few more things into the collective impact model as part of our local context. For example, I will give you an example of a complex need. A divorced mother with 2 primary school kids and a maid, but they're all living in a condominium. The mother has no money, is an alcoholic, and suffers from depression. The kids often beg neighbors for food, or the kind principal in school will give them lunch in school so that they will not go hungry later. Sometimes they are unable to go to school, so the principal or the teacher will pick them up. And the ex-husband often comes home with a bag of dirty clothes to wash. He is living in another condominium with another woman. So the family is very dysfunctional. So you can think about what happened to the kids. We also have a grandfather who's looking after 7 grandchildren of different fathers. They are of different fathers because the daughter just deposited her kids and she just disappeared and left the responsibility of care to the grandfather. And so we began to search for more partners who could share our belief and our commitment. We also have key leaders coming into and going out of the ICP2 for the past 7 years. For example, we have survived 3 general managers who have changed, and I think 4 principals. We have also survived the merger of primary schools. These are some of the things that we do face on the ground when we practice collective impact, and especially if it is a very long-term program. We are also looking for a system to help us monitor our intervention and results for case management, because we spend about, on average, 3 to 4 hours every other week to do update on case management. In the end, we were very happy that a partner, Trampoline, came in to develop the case management system for us for free. And so we don't have to go through this process of having to include a lot of sitting down and filling up forms and Excel sheets and all that. So many people also did not believe in the ICP because they were not used to seeing this kind of program being run beyond 3 years. And they also wonder if any partner would be so committed to a long-term program, let alone a group of partners like us. But actually the partner community of partners overcome it all, and we're still together. I think that's one of the stories that I want to share. Even when our education ministry or MOE is rolling out its own program in the last 2 years to help vulnerable primary school students, and I think Shai can attest to that, we engage the MOE. We bring them in. MOE help us to identify primary schools so that we can complement their work in return, because although we have a very strong government, we have a very small country, the government cannot do everything. And part of the thing that the government would like us to do is really to be self-reliant, to build up our social resilience. And that is also what we are trying to do as well as a community. So over the last 7 years, we started with 1 school, and now we are working with 6 schools in 2 districts. ICP is a collective impact initiative to promote social mobility in children and youth. And on this note, may I ask Rota to turn on the slide 1 for me. I hope you all can see it. I have put in this particular ICP model slide in our own context. And this is what we as a partner, community of partners have gleaned over the years. We have taken in three concepts. If you look at the bottom of the house, collective impact is one of them. Collaborative leadership is another, which is what I'm going to share a bit more later on. And also the ABC concept. I think these are the three key concepts on community development and building a community, bridging communities. This is what we do, together with setting the common agenda for what we want to see in the outcome of the kids in terms of that they graduate and progress to secondary schools. Aggregated, there are two things that we have included into the collective impact model. We have included the aggregator of resources because the CDCs are the aggregator of resources in Singapore. And each CDC, of course, is headed by a mayor. I think the important thing about this is that we cannot invite just so many key partners in, and their commitment will vary. So therefore, as aggregator of resources, the CDC really took the opportunity to scan their network and help to meet the needs, targeted specific needs of the people in the community, the people we serve, the children we serve, and the parents we serve. The other thing that I would like to really talk about is really community of partners. And here I put in the word on the left-hand side is the word culture. Actually, community, we want to build a community. In order for us to build a community, we must understand what is it that we want to do and how do we, what is our values, what is it that we want to do together, and what resonate with all of us. And we found collaborative leadership as a good way for us to help each other out, work with each other, build that strong bonds that we have. And I think that's very, very key, and that's very, very important. And that's why I've included community of partners as one of the key pillars or the foundation for which we can do our collective impact initiative. So if you take a look at this clearly, you will see this is a house. On top of it, we have common agenda with a roof. What we're trying to do is we're trying to solve complex long-term issues like social mobility, mental health. But at the same time, we know that we have a strong government, we have a compact Singapore, but we also have limited resources. And when you talk about collaborative leadership, we talk about innovation, we talk about passion, we talk about commitment, and how we can create stronger collaboration as well. So, but really, at the end of the day, if you summarize this entire deck of this entire slide, the important thing that I wanted to share with you is really the heart and soul of the initiative are the community of partners. They are the one who persevere in times of trouble, never forgetting why they are doing what they are doing in the first place. And we are a community and not a group of partners. I think that is the big difference as to why we stay together and why we can solve some of the 5 problems, the example of the 5 problems that I've shared with you earlier on. And yes, sometimes we also bang table to get our point across, and we do criticize. But we know that it's nothing personal because we are friends again at the end of the meeting. So I think my ICP partners are here today in this session. Jenny and Hui Kim and the rest, they are, and Eric, and I'm sure that they can share a lot more with you if you're interested later on. So let's pause and take a while, take a look at ICP, for example, which has weathered many storms, and the ICP has stayed true to its cause. So actually, what I wanted to say is, collaborative leadership culture in ICP helps a lot. And we always talk about organizational culture, but we seldom ask ourselves what kind of culture we want to have in our collaboration with partners. Think about it. I hope you're still closing your eyes. think about it. How can partners who are leaders work together to co-create a collaborative leadership culture? Because if you have this culture, chances are your collaboration will be much, much stronger. And when trouble comes in, when money runs out, you will not just say, okay, stop, I'm not doing this anymore because I have no more money. But what do the partners do? Actually, the partners band together and they went and sourced for donors. And we went together to pitch our project together to ask for money. And it helped tremendously. According to David Crislip and Carl Larson, who are the creator of this collaborative leadership model, it helps to strengthen collaboration, especially involving complex problems with multiple partners. It's about leadership of the process and not of the group. The process of solving the problem through sharing, through being creative and innovative, through learning, but actually above all, this is also what Liz has mentioned in her slide on leadership, but above all, through having the courage to admit that we need each other. We are interdependent on each other, especially in this network society, and we do not know everything. I think that is something that we need to admit to ourselves. And if we can cross that hurdle, I think we will get the help that we need, and we will then be able to help the people who needed our help. But so, in other words, to be politically incorrect, okay, to be politically incorrect, one of the first things we need to learn is how to let go of our ego. If you want to be in collaborative leadership culture, learn how to share our power with other leaders. Finally, I encourage you to learn how to share information, and also donors. Donors are very important because through the donors, we can therefore continue on with the initiative. And this is what ICP partners have done. They have been very selfless, they trust each other, and they do that. It is only through sharing generously that actually you can build the trust and confidence in your partner. So in ICP, everyone is a leader, but everyone also has a different role to play in the group. And that's what I'm trying to explain to partners and to organizations, to ministries, to government agencies, that you don't have to lead. You can be one of the leaders. So, but we all work together. So I will give you an example of ICP, the different roles that we play. So the CDC plays the resource aggregator role. The PA plays the common space convener role. Shine helps the mid-risk kids and deal with case management. Scouts help high-risk kids. I don't know whether the Scouts are here today, but I think I saw Peter. And they bring at-risk and mainstream kids together in the community through community scouting. The grassroots, New Life, Care Singapore help the low-risk kids. Anglican Care Community Services look after the mental health of the family. We have then the family service centers looking after the families, and the schools are actually the glues that help to bring the students to us, the parents to us, and working with us closely. And then we have Trampoline, who is the software person. They built the case management system. We have finally the Tote Board. No, sorry, we have the E2I and also the Singapore Business Federation. The E2I is actually the Employment and Employability Institute. And with them, they help parents and caregivers in skills, learning, and employment. And this is one of the key things towards social mobility, not just education, but also employment as well. If the parents and the caregivers have a healthy income and they are stable in their employment, then the children will benefit from that. and the children will can continue to study without concern, without fear, without any interruption. And I think education and employment are very key towards upward social mobility. Finally, I'd like to actually include TOPBOD, Singapore Business Federation Foundation, Quantage, and yes, my ICP partner reminded me, MSF as well. So I'll talk about MSF a bit later. So these three funding agencies are our funders, but we have also included them and make them our partners in crime. They sit in our meetings, our regular meetings, and they have discussion with us. They discuss with us on issues if they feel that there are more things that needs to be done. And finally, MSF. Yes, MSF is key, and I don't know whether Karen is here today. Karen is really the key person that helps. So to get to that together, we complement each other. We therefore work together as a true collaborative, guiding ourselves with one shared vision. For some of you who are keen to start, I know my time is up, but I wanted to share the slide 2. Ruta, can you flash out the slide 2 for me? This one summarizes the key point of what it takes. If you're keen to start, where do you begin? What do you need to do to be a collaborative leader? Start by being yourself, and that's one of the things that I advise you to do. Be authentic. And collaborative leaders are like social architects. You start by facilitating big and small conversation. You create a space, safe space for this conversation, and encourage everyone to contribute. Participate rather than direct during a conversation. I think that's very important. But finally, I think Liz also talked about the board. It is very important and crucial for you to help your board to better understand the collaboration and the ideas of collaborative leadership culture so that you can work better together. Finally, once you're confident and ready, please help to groom the next generation of new leaders in collaborative leadership. And understand the situation before you embark on this journey. In conclusion, strong collaborative leadership culture is in ICP partners because they believe in them. We are constantly learning new things every time we meet. The learning journey is also a self-discovery journey for many of us. The result is a stronger community of partners. And our next step is really to build a network of micro communities across the island who share our belief and our commitment. And we welcome you to join us on this journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kar Yee, for a very informative and very personal sharing on this collective impact initiative. So very quickly, we're going to go into the Q&A segment, but unfortunately, we are running out of time. So I'm just going to have 2 questions, one to Liz and one to Kar Yee. Liz, this question, I think many will have this in their mind. What is the biggest challenge that collaborative leaders face when convening partners to work collectively on an issue? What would you say from your experience? Biggest challenge.
You know, thanks so much for that question, Wu Peng. I think, you know, the biggest challenge that we have is getting out of our own way. We are all paid in our paid work to be problem solvers and doers. And when we work collaboratively together, we might not necessarily always have the answer to the problem. And the problem might be as complex as our speakers have shared with us, both Melissa and Kar Yee. And so the problems benefit from multiple partners kind of weighing in and bringing different kinds of suggestions to that problem. And so, you know, it's not really up to us when we're working collaboratively to solve it all by ourselves. It's really about, you know, working collaboratively. And so getting out of our own way, that's the biggest challenge we sometimes face.
Well, thanks, Liz, for the wisdom. This question to Kar Yee. Kar Yee, you know, at a pragmatic level, social service agency needs to gather funds. We need to let our donors know what we are doing. So my question to you is, as a collective, how do we share credit so that, you know, being part of the collective will still allow an agency to be able to garner resources from donors?
Of course. You need to, I think first and foremost, if you look back at the slides that I've shared, I think one of the key things you need to do is give credit where credit is due. And I think people who put in the effort should be recognized, and same goes for the partners. Collective impact, as you can see for the ICP, it doesn't belong to me or Mei Ling or Hui Kim. It actually belongs to everybody in the group. And the efforts and the success of how we have helped the people actually is attributed to the partners, not just individuals. So if you look at how we have shaped it for collaborative leadership culture, whether a person come and go, whether the GM is replaced, whether the leader is being replaced or not, the spirit of collaboration and the spirit of collaborative leadership is still there. And the work still continue on, even the school principals. I hope that answered the question.
Thanks, Kar Yee. And I would add to that, from my perspective, SSAs that are being part of collective is also forward-looking and trying to address issue at a larger community-based level. And often these are very compelling reasons for donors who are looking for more innovative ways of resolving issue at a more sustainable, using more sustainable approach. So actually that, in a way, raises your profile to be part of collective. So that would be my take on in addition to your response as well. So with that, right, we really come to the end of this very fruitful webinar, and I hope that you find it meaningful as well. So in a few days' time, you will be receiving our follow-up email, which will include a link to the recording of today's webinar. And also we will like to encourage you to fill up the feedback form, because this is very important for us to improve for our second webinar. And we have also created a virtual group on collective impact in the SSI Gather Here platform, which we would like to encourage you to participate and grow this learning community together with us. So with that, hope that you look forward to our email as a follow-up from this webinar, right? And that will be the end of today's session. And I'd like to thank Liz, Kar Yee, and also Melissa and Paul for helping with this webinar, and Ruth, of course, being the person behind all this administrative matters. Okay, and to all of you, thank you for spending time with us this morning, and I hope that you have benefited from the webinar. I look forward to seeing you at the next webinar, which is going to be on the backbone function, the nuts and bolts of backbone function. So please join us. Thank you very much, and see you.